I am Dylan White. I am the programmer and designer behind Rift Wizard. It's kind of a traditional roguelike, like it's a turn-based, grid-based wizard simulator. Tried to re-examine a lot of the basic fundamental assumptions of roguelike. Made a bunch of interesting changes and variants on the formula. It's just my dream wizard simulator.
Tell me a little bit about your history with games in general. Like what kind of stuff were you playing as a kid, and then what was kind of like the impetus and the inspiration to get into game development from the games that you played?
The original Rogue was one of the first games I ever played. I think I was like 4 or 5, played it with my dad on like a really old computer. Had to learn how to navigate through folders in DOS in order to run it. Super Mario Brothers will always have a special place in my heart. Phantasy Star 4, that was like my big Genesis game. That was the first game. I think like the experience that a lot of people had playing Final Fantasy 7, I kind of had playing Phantasy Star 4. Like it was the first game that had this big giant world and all these characters that I really got into. Yeah, then I guess I moved on to PC games at some point because I couldn't like afford the next generation of consoles, but I could always like figure out how to just get games on PC, especially with like old AOL and just like really early internet stuff. I could like go find game demos in various places. And there was all sorts of weird game designs floating around at the time, much more interesting than what you could find on consoles. So I played a lot of like really obscure RPGs. Like I played a game called Gladiator with no O between the T and the R for like a couple years. That was my favorite game. It's like a game that I doubt anyone listening has never played it. It's impossible to categorize into like any genre. It's like somewhere between an RPG and an RTS, like maybe like a single player MOBA, you could almost think of it as, but it had like more than one map. And then I got into Diablo 2. Diablo 2 was like really big for me. Played a lot of Diablo 2, like thousands of hours. Kind of finished up with that game at some point. And then I didn't come back to roguelikes until college. I met a bunch of people who were really into NetHack, which I thought was pretty cool. And I was like kind of blown away by just the amount of stuff that was in NetHack. Like it's this game with these, like you see the tiles or the ASCII and it looks like there's not much there. But then as you're playing the game, you realize there's like more inside of that game than there is in other games. Then from NetHack, I got into Tales of Maj'El 4 and Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup, which were really big influences on Rift Wizard. And and then I guess the other game that I played a very high amount of was Dota. That is also a game I played quite a bit of. And I still play quite a bit of Dota, actually.
At what point in kind of that like wide breadth of history did you start heading in the route of becoming a game developer?
Oh, very early. I remember wanting to make games like I had like notebooks where I would like make spreadsheets with like monsters and like how much attack a centaur has and like what its special abilities are. And I would just like fill these notebooks up when I was like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old. So like very, very early. Kind of got detoured a bit in college, you know, just trying to be like a responsible adult, be independent and make money and stuff. But I think the initial impulse has always been there.
Somewhere I think my mom has stacks of, because I would go over to my grandma's house and I would play Super Nintendo, and then I would play through the entirety of these games and then go home and draw them.
That's interesting. That's more of like that seems like a level designer thing to do, or artist maybe. I was always all about just like the stats and the mechanics, which I guess kind of shows with how Rift Wizard turned out. Like I would just make spreadsheets. This is funny, actually. The first project I worked on was Guild Wars 2. I was like not a very motivated or driven adolescent or teenager. So I never got very far at all, just making games when I was a kid. I initially worked in finance when I graduated from college, but then I ended up moving to Seattle for personal reasons. And then after I moved to Seattle, I was my initial plan was to work. There was a prototype I was working on when I first moved to Seattle. I was trying to make like, I don't even know how to describe that game because the scope was so broad and ambitious and ill-defined. It was like Dwarf Fortress meets War Machine. like War Machine Hordes, the tabletop game. And that prototype didn't get very far because it was very poorly scoped. I made like the battle system kind of, but then like a battle system's not a game, you know? Like a game has to have like a beginning and an end and goals and progression. This was just like, it was like a board game, almost like chess, you know, where like you would have some pieces. There was a computer AI that had some pieces. I had like a really complicated machine learning system that would like try to create good AI for the game, and kind of did and kind of didn't. It was interesting, but it wasn't a very cohesive game, and I didn't have any plan to sell the game or make money, or I mean, I had like this vague plan that I would eventually, you know, sell it online for $10 or $20, but I didn't really have a plan to finish it. And meanwhile, at the same time, I had submitted a resume to ArenaNet, which is a company that made an MMO called Guild Wars, and then an MMO called Guild Wars 2, which you've probably heard of. And I ended up getting an internship at ArenaNet working on Guild Wars 2, like right after launch. And that was like my first exposure to real game development. That was, it was really interesting. It was very educational. I learned lots of like there were things that I wasn't quite sure how to do in my own game. Like, you know, how would I program this or how would I implement it? And like all of those questions I had about like, how would I do this? They were like all answered just by looking at the Guild Wars 2 code base. So that was a pretty awesome introduction to game development.
So, like, where did the like kind of early ideas start for Rift Wizard?
I think, let's see. So, I mean, it was a long time between Guild Wars 2 and Rift Wizard. It was like maybe 5 or 10 years. I don't know. There was just like a lot of the genesis for Rift Wizard was I would like look at games and then I would be dissatisfied with some aspect of them. Like I would play Diablo and Path of Exile, which is kind of like the spiritual successor to Diablo 2, much more so even than Diablo 3. And I would see these cool systems, but then I would play the game and there'd be like some aspect of it which was like disappointing to me. Or I would play through I don't know, I would just play games and then I would like them, but I would like want them to be like, I would want there to be something else in them. Like I felt that way for a long time, but I never felt like I never felt like I could work on a game full time, and I never felt like I could finish a game just on like nights and weekends. So I kind of just like collected all these ideas for a game in my back pocket, you know. Just waited until I was ready to not work full time and work on my game full time to start working on it.
What did Rift Wizard look like when you decided to move to working on it full time from your full-time gig at the time?
Oh, I had nothing. It was nothing at all.
Did you have like ideas in the back of your mind, or like a basic design?
It was just purely ideas. Actually, yeah. So the ideas were crazy too. The ideas weren't anything like what the game turned out. So my first idea was it was going to be like a religion simulator, and you were going to have a holy city, which you would build buildings in, and the buildings would have like adjacency bonuses and interact with each other. And then you would like answer prayers, and the prayers would be like combat scenarios. And then you would use the buildings in your city to like summon units. And depending on like you could try all these different builds and like see how far they would go, which sounds nothing like Rift Wizard, right?
So like Black and White's ActRaiser.
Yeah. Like a little bit of XCOM in there too, maybe, with like having this team and progression, and then like the RTS buildings and upgrades thing, or Magic the Gathering deck building. It was too complicated. This idea was too complicated. It had too many elements. At some point I was like, all right, this is my first game, and my goal should be like finish the smallest project, which is interesting to people, you know? So I cut out the building stuff, and I tried to think about like why do I like these ideas? Like, what is the heart of this idea? What is the thing that I really want to do? And the thing that I really wanted to do two things. I wanted to do a game where the combat was like interesting and challenging, where you were always trying to read the situation and come up with your own strategy for how to overcome it. And then I also wanted something where you were kind of like designing your character or your party or whatever it was going to be. You like had a lot of control over the tools that you were using in these combats, because I wanted you to like go through these combat situations with different sets of tools every time you were playing the game. and I want you to like gradually learn more about the set of tools that you have and like gain perspective on it. Like I wanted there to be synergies and combos in the game the player would like slowly find and uncover, and then like different variants of those strategies that the player could try. That was kind of like the most basic pillar of the design, I think.
This has been a really interesting conversation so far, because every single one of your prototype ideas that you worked on in the past that you've told me about have been very large, massive, expansive things. And when I think of Rift Wizard, the thing that I like about it so much is how like boiled down to like the absolute core of what a roguelike is in almost every aspect, with the exception of the absolutely manically insane spell system that the game's got in it. So it's like it's kind of I guess where I get maybe why roguelikes? Like, how did you go from the city builder design to ending up building the ultimate wizard roguelike?
Yeah, I think I chose roguelike because I felt like it was doable. I felt like that was something that like I as at the time I was starting off as one person. I eventually brought K Hoops on to do the art and the sound. But the way I was thinking about it was like, what is a genre or formula where like I can do the whole thing alone, and where also like I felt like, what is a genre which is underserved? Like, what is a genre where there aren't already a million like great games in this genre on Steam? And that's yeah, so like that's kind of how I arrived at roguelike. I felt like there were a couple good roguelikes. I basically felt like there were two good roguelikes to play at the time. I felt like Tales of Maj'El 4 was really good, and I felt like Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup was really good. But I didn't feel like either of them were perfect, and I felt like they're both of them are missing some basic features, right? Like they don't have animated units. So like a lot of people just will not like won't play either of those games because like they want animated. That's like this one little graphical feature that they need, and they don't have. Tales of Maj'El 4, it's got a little bit of sound. Dungeon Crawl's got no sound. But I felt like with just like minor improvements, I felt like these games could like this genre of games could just be like reach a much larger group of people. And I looked at games like Dungeons of Dreadmore is that's like a traditional roguelike that's on Steam, which I think a lot of people have played and like, but I think and like I played it and I thought it was all right, but I thought it could be like I thought I could do a better job. Like I thought it was missing a lot of the things that make the like the hardcore off Steam roguelikes good. So it was kind of like in a way it was just a business decision. It was like, you know, if I have to support myself by making games, like what is the game that I can make, that I can support myself off of, that I can finish, that I'm excited to make? Because like there are like a million concepts for games that I would be excited to make. You know, like my computer is full of notepad files that are like ideas for games. But I think the hard thing was thinking like, what is a game that it would not be insane? Like just from like a standpoint of my own personal life and my own financial life, like what is a game that it would not be insane to make? And then like wizard roguelike was the concept that made the most sense there.
So when you I guess started prototyping Rift Wizard in its obviously it would probably be pretty far from its current form.
Oh yeah.
How did you end up in the strictly like limited numbers of abilities base? Because like the game doesn't have any kind of bumping combat. There's no percent to chance to hit. Everything is very mechanically readable from a player perspective. Like it's most other roguelikes that I end up playing and putting large amounts of time into, I'm constantly looking at percentage to hit chances and
lots of mechanics,
dodge
formulas,
chances, and tons of HP and like stats out the wazoo. So I'm always fascinated by games that can have a incredibly engaging experience while at the same time removing half of the mechanics that I think are not vital to the genre by any stretch, but like staples of the genre.
It was like it was two things. First of all was just laziness. Like I made the most basic system possible. And then I was like, I had this vague plan in my head that I would like add dodge chance and like spell evasion and quick cast spells that didn't take up your entire turn and like all these different mechanics and maybe like wisdom, in strength, charisma, etc. Like I had in the back of my mind like maybe that I would add these stats, but that wasn't the part of the design that really excited me. The part that really excited me was cool spell designs. So like before I made those formulas, I just started making spells. And then at some point I had like 10 or 20 spells, and a couple of them were a lot of them were basic, like Fireball and Lightning Bolt were some of the first ones. But then there was stuff like Imp Swarm was one of the first spells that I had. And I looked at the set of mechanics that I had and I said, like I don't need all this extra stuff. Like I can just make spells. I don't need to have a really complicated stat system and all this other stuff. So that was part of it. And then the other thing was I really wanted the game to be like understandable. Kind of like I wanted it to be understandable the way that a board game is understandable. Where like when you're playing like Settlers of Catan, you can kind of see what might happen. And that's maybe a bad example because there's lots of randomness in that game. But when you're playing like chess, you can plan a couple moves ahead. But the game is still very interesting because the situations are complex enough that you can't just like go down the possibility tree of all the different stuff that could happen. You have to like form an intuition and a strategy. So I kind of had it in my head that it was okay to not have these complex formulas. And then I looked at like I would look at stuff like Baldur's Gate or just like D&D games. And I felt like they had all these stats, but like when you find an item in Baldur's Gate that says like +3 wisdom, it's like so many mental steps for the player to figure out like what does that mean? Like how does +3 wisdom like change my character? And the answer is often like very bizarre in that game and very counterintuitive. So I kind of like had this inkling that I didn't want to go down that route anyway. And then I would look at games like Slay the Spire, for instance. A lot of these like newer roguelite games that just had very, very simple mechanics and like basic mechanics, but then the strategy they used was to have really complex content. Yeah, I'd say those were like all the things that pushed me towards having a simple core, but then like really elaborate spells and just what I would call content, like spells, monsters, shrines, etc.
Because the immediate impression I get from people when I play the game and I'm streaming it is this looks really simple, and then I show them the spells screen and their brains begin to melt a little bit.
Yeah.
So how did you go about designing that spell screen? Like, because you said that you just kind of started making spells, but like then there's spells, then there's modifications called spells, and then there's the shrines that can modify the modified spells. So how did that design process?
Oh, it's interesting. I mean, the game went through like a lot of different versions. Like the initial version was it was like Pac-Man meets Dungeon Crawl. So like the spells didn't have charges. There was just this mana that you would like pick up mana coins all over the level. Again, like Pac-Man. That's where auto pickup came from, by the way. It was much more important when there were like 100 mana pickups on the ground. Yeah, it just went through so many. Initially, you would find these shops, which were like treasure chests, where you would like spend your gold to get a spell, and then you could also find things that you could like find a damage shrine, which would let you upgrade the damage of any spell. So the first system was just you're kind of like random drafting spells, the way that you would draft cards in like a Magic the Gathering booster draft, and then like putting these shrines on them. But then like that system had lots of problems. It didn't work very well. Like what you would always do is you would pick one spell to be like your heavy hitter spell, and then you would just you would like enhance that spell with as much as possible. So the way the players' builds would end up looking is they would be like, I'm a fireball caster, and their fireball would fill like an entire level because they would have like 7 radius upgrades on it. And it would like one-shot everything because it would have like 7 damage upgrades on it. And like what I was going for was like a Path of Exile style system where you could like I wanted there to be a lot of interesting, meaningful decisions about how you're specializing your character, and I wanted every run to be different. I wanted you to have a different set of stuff every run. But then I also wanted you to have a lot of control over your build, because I didn't want you to just be like surfing the waves of randomness. I wanted you to go into a game with like an idea of, this game I want to try this, or this game I want to try that. And so I moved towards something a little more like the current spell system. It was more complicated. The current spell system is where you just have skill points and you buy spells. I had something more complicated originally where you got skill points, but you had to buy spells, and you also had to buy like levels in different schools of magic. And so like there's kind of this RTS, I don't know, like StarCraft RTS build element where you were thinking about like, I'll buy this and then this and then this. But then that was like so complicated that no one but me could understand it. And there's no reason for it to be so complicated either. So I tried to think of something simpler, which was just having all the spells in the menu and you can buy any of them at any time. And then I was trying to think, well, what would the additional layers on top of that be? And I knew I wanted to do, I like always had the idea that I wanted to have like cool passive skills that enhance all of your spells in a weird way. The spell upgrades, like the individual upgrades on individual spells, I think that kind of came from, that was almost just like a gratuitous back of the box feature where I was like, if this is the ultimate wizard game, like what can you do? It's like, well, you can get spells and you can get passive skills, and then you have to be able to customize every spell. And if I'd kept going, I would have allowed you to like customize the passive skills too, I think. Like having like an upgrade on Crackle Void, that made it like also shoot out like fire beams or something. I kind of ran out of time for that one. Yeah, I think the general instinct was just I wanted to have the deepest, most complex magic system like ever. And I felt like if I just made that the number one priority of the game and tried to ignore as much other stuff as possible, I thought that would be like a pretty cool game. And that might be a game that I could finish too.
Another kind of like very specific mechanic that I have that I'm curious about is the monster spawners and the respawning enemies. Because I would like to congratulate you on making a roguelike with respawning enemies that I don't hate. Because every single one with respawning enemies, I almost quit immediately. Like that is usually like, it's like this and Dungeon Mans are the two games with respawning enemies that I haven't just immediately just dropped.
Oh, what's the Dungeon Mans respawn mechanic? I haven't played Dungeon Mans.
When you're running down dungeons in Dungeon Mans, if you go to turn around and leave the dungeon, you will run into enemies that come out of dark corners again. So
they just like spawn in fog?
Yeah, they respawn in areas that you can't see on floors that you're not on, and also on floors that you are on. But the reason it does that is because the game isn't designed to let you backtrack, and the dungeons are pretty short. So you're just kind of supposed to hit a dungeon, power through it, and you should be strong enough to get to the end of it. But the game also gives you a few recharging ways to teleport out of dungeons pretty quickly, but there are some areas where that can be very annoying.
Yeah, so I didn't originally have spawners. Originally, like, you would get to a level and there'd be a bunch of monsters. And then I gave my game to my friends to play test. And what the smart ones would do is they would just spawn in a corner and they would just nuke stuff as it funneled into the corner. And I was like, well, this isn't what I want. Like, this is not my wizard fantasy. Like, my wizard fantasy is not like a tower defense game where I find the best choke point and just like hold down my flamethrower until everything's dead. My wizard fantasy is like, you're under extreme time pressure and you're like moving around the map. You're making really hard decisions about how to use your resources. You're like struggling. You have maybe for a little bit you have to hold a bridge for some reason, or maybe you have to just like power through in some direction. Maybe you have to run while something is chasing you to do something urgent. Like these were like the vague ideas I had about like what I wanted the player to be doing, and just having enemies spawn did not accomplish that. So I wanted to add some kind of objective to the game, and I wanted the objective to have some kind of time pressure. Monster spawners solved that. It just like solved a lot of problems. It mainly just solved the problem of players hiding in a corner, killing everything as it walked towards you. I guess the other point about the design I should touch on, like the natural question to ask is like, well, why don't you just spawn monsters in fog? And the answer is, well, Rift Wizard doesn't have fog. And then the natural question is, why doesn't Rift Wizard have fog? And I felt very strongly that I did not want Fog of War in Rift Wizard. I didn't want to do any complicated monster AI because I felt like any complicated monster AI that I did would be something the player could exploit to avoid fighting monsters directly. Once I had the idea of no fog and the idea of objectives with time pressure and the idea that I wanted the player to move around, spawners was like the only way I could think of to implement that. And some players hate spawners. Spawners are like one of the most like of all the mechanics in the game, I think I get the most complaints about spawners.
It's kind of funny because the thing that the initial elevator pitch I got from somebody on my Discord was it's roguelike Gauntlet because Gauntlet has the same spawners.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
So
definitely.
To me, the monster spawners, the lack of like just bumping to attack and the 3 exits and you get to see where you're going and select where you're going.
Yeah.
Like it can be looked at from my point of view is one of two ways. Either these are lazy design choices that are just easier to develop for, but also make it one of the most unique like game strategy wise I've ever played in a roguelike. So it's kind of in my opinion, kind of a tremendous achievement in that regard.
I think there are two things that I think make Rift Wizard good. And one of them is like, I think the spells are cool and that's like easy and obvious. But I think the second one, which is much harder, is like the game is structured in a way where your spells mattered. And I think where a lot of games kind of fall flat is they have all these really interesting build systems and spell systems. And you can try all these different things, but it like doesn't matter which one you try. And like if Rift Wizard was a game where you could just stand in the corner and like nuke everything down, but there were 100 different spells you could choose from in order to nuke everything down, I feel like it would be like a failure. Like it really wouldn't have lived up to its potential because it wouldn't matter that there were all these different strategies because they would all boil down to the same thing. Like it was really important to me in the design of the game that different builds actually played differently. And for different builds to actually play differently, the thing the player is doing has to be like interesting. Yeah, with like the Rift choice was really important too, because I wanted players' builds to have weaknesses and strengths, and then I also wanted to randomly generate levels, but I wasn't sure at first how to handle the obvious problem of like, well, what if you have a fire build and then you're running into like fire elementals, you know? Do I just like cheese it and say like, well, the fire elementals, they only have 95% fire resist, so you can like still eventually kill the fire elementals with your fire? That seemed like really lame to me. But then, the 3 gates, it's kind of like the glue that holds the design together a lot of the time. It just like, it puts a lot of the stuff that I would normally be responsible for as a designer. It just like puts that onto the player, which is very, very convenient for me. And I think it ends up being a fun mechanic too, though.
I think it makes the game feel wider as well. It kind of builds this image of branching paths.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it does. If it was just one portal, it would feel like you're just going through a hallway.
Yeah, it'd be like traditional Rogue. You put Rift Wizard up in early access on Steam, and
I did. Yeah.
I'm curious. Was that the plan from the start to go into early access?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I definitely started with like vague plans in terms of publishing and selling the game. I was pretty sure that Steam was the platform. I think Steam's a pretty good platform. If you're trying to make an indie niche PC, I mean, just if you're trying to make a niche indie game, Steam is like Steam's probably the best platform. Like Steam does a lot of like machine learning to try to match games with the niche of players who are interested in that game. Because like everyone has a different Steam shop, you know, like you open Steam, you see different games than when I open Steam.
It's like YouTube.
And then early access seemed like, your options are you can launch early access or you can just do a full launch, right? And I didn't have like a giant Twitter following or like you can, I didn't like Rift Wizard is not a game where you can post a GIF of the game and then have 100 people see that GIF and say, oh my God, I have to buy that game. And then they'll go to Steam and wishlist your game. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's a bit more of a slow burn.
Yeah. And I wasn't even sure that the game was finished when I put it on early access. I had like pre-Steam, I think I maybe had 20 people playtest the game, which is like a lot. I mean, kind of felt like a lot. I think a big mistake a lot of indie devs make is they don't do anywhere near enough playtesting. But I had like a couple dozen people playtest the game. And like really what I wanted was just to get more feedback from more people and see like, is there like what do people other than my friend Jacob think of the game? Like just wanted a wider group. And I mean the game changed quite dramatically in early access actually. Like I remember you could use shrines over and over again on the same spell. So like again, you'd kind of do that thing where it's like I am a fireball wizard, and you just pick up fireball and some utility spells, and then put as many shrines as you could on the fireball. You'd end up with a giant fireball and just try to clear every level with fireball. And so like that was kind of a problem that got fixed in early access. And there was a lot of stuff that changed in early access. Like Rift previews, you used to be able to you could like look at the next rift, and then you could also look at like the rifts that rift led to.
Oh, really?
And that felt very, very wide, which was awesome. Like it really felt like you're in this giant universe of portals. But then like the better people got at the game, the more they realized like what's really important about the game is like choosing easy rifts basically. And like the best way to play the game is to make a build that can just usually that is like very one-dimensional and fragile and powerful, and just like rampage through the rifts that have no defense against that. That was not how I imagined and envisioned people playing the game. Like that wasn't the version of Rift Wizard that I wanted. The version that I wanted was like you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons of having a very focused build versus having a more versatile build. And I wanted you to like prepare a little bit for things that weren't exactly what you were looking to fight. And so that was a big change. I don't know. There were just like so many big changes that I ended up making in early access. I'm very glad that I did it.
So I guess that generally the early access was because then the next question I'm gonna kind of ask here is like what was that experience like just being in early access? Like was it just new people coming in? Was there a significant added pressure at that point? Like did it change the way you were developing the game at all?
In the beginning, I would do a build by making a zip file and uploading it to Google Drive, and like messaging a couple friends and being like, hey, there's a new build, try it out and tell me what you think. And, there would be like glaring crash issues or bugs. And I would just be like, oh yeah, ignore that. And so there's like a level of, I think, polish and professionalism that you're kind of like forced to adapt once you put something in front of a wider audience and once you start charging money for it. And so it was nice to like ramp up gradually on that in early access rather than just opening the floodgates and then having everyone come in and trying to solve every bug and UI issue that comes up all at once instantly.
You also like were able to keep, I guess, the scope of your early access quite reasonable because the period of time from release into early access and then release into full release was what I would describe as short and reasonable.
Yeah. I think a year is like the perfect amount of time for early access for me. Like I didn't want to do the thing where I make like this 75-page feature list and promise that I'll eventually do it if you just give me a bunch of money right now. I feel like people do that a lot with like unreleased games and Kickstarters and stuff. I wanted to have a very defined scope, and the scope even like narrowed, I think, as early access went on. Like there was a point where I felt like I wanted to add like an area system, like I wanted to have like just like Dungeon Crawl has, where there's like a swamp and a ruins, etc., etc. But then eventually I realized that like the system for generating areas right now was fine and didn't need to be changed. That was like a big narrowing of scope. And yeah, I think the thing with early access is you have to balance, like you want to actually listen to what your players are asking for. Cause like if you just have like this fake early access where you say like, hey, here's the game. And then you don't listen to anyone's feedback, that doesn't feel very good for your players. And like, why are you even doing it? Whereas like at the same time, there were like limits to the scope of how the game was going to change. It became more and more limited as early access went on. So initially I didn't even know you were like supposed to release a roadmap. And then like a lot of players just kept asking like, where's this going? Like, what's the roadmap? And then I like looked at other games in early access and I was like, oh yeah, like most of them, they mostly have a roadmap. So I figured I should do the same thing. And then I don't know, like scoping out a year of development, definitely tricky. I don't think I was 100% correct on like all the things that I did and was going to do. I forget everything that was on that list, but I feel like there were at least 2 or 3 big points that I did not hit. But there were some things that I knew I wanted to do. Like I think the shrine change might have been on there, and that was like Like I knew shrines were problematic and that I wanted to spend a lot of time fixing those. And I knew that challenge modes would be like a really cool thing for the game, but I knew there was something I hadn't. It was like a big unit of work that I hadn't started yet, so it made sense to put that on the roadmap.
So once you kind of reached the end of your early access, how like what was your end goal? Like what was your this is how I want the game to look when I release it as a 1.0 or full release?
I think my main goal was I wanted to like understand what the average player response to the game was. So like I wanted to get to the point where like I was just comfortable saying this is a finished and complete game. Like in early access, you can always say like whenever someone gives you feedback, like tells you this is confusing or like this UI looks bad or anything like that, you can always say, well, hey, it's early access. You know, that'll
Mm-hmm.
be changed eventually. But then like once you fully launch a game, you can't say that anymore. Like when you fully launch a game, you have to like stand behind that game as a finished product and like as like for whatever it is at that point. So I was kind of just waiting until I'd fixed all the things that like irked me about the game. Like a really big one was the shrine stacking thing. Like when I launched the game in early access, like I knew the game was fun and interesting, but there was a lot of stuff that I felt like wasn't good enough in the game to call it finished. Like at launch, like I would be satisfied with just the game at launch being the game forever. That won't be the game forever. Like I've got a couple more plans, but like I think it would be okay if that was the game forever. I think all of all the major issues in the game which were like reasonably solvable without, like going back to the basic design of the game were solved. And I think that's like the point at which you can call a game like full launched.
Yeah, no, it actually does make a lot of sense. It's I guess enviable because I think a lot of games don't make it to that point. You know, they're I mean, maybe it's just kind of because of your like willingness, I guess, to strip out features that are either too complicated or taking away from the experience. Because I think a lot of games they
Yeah.
add a feature and then once it's there, they keep it, right? And then you end up with the tome problem of, as you know, I like Tales of Magiel, but like there's a bajillion stats of a bajillion things to the point where I play that game for 4 hours and I have a headache.
Yeah, or have you ever played like World of Warcraft? Have you played World of Warcraft recently?
I've never played World of Warcraft, but I know what it
Oh,
looks
wow,
like.
that's crazy.
Yeah, I'm
It's
not an
yeah, I mean
MMO
it's
kid.
well the MMOs do this thing where like every year they will add new major systems. So then MMOs that are like 10 years older or more, they have like 50 systems in them. And then you're like, what do I even do? Like what do I even pay attention to in this game anymore?
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. Like a lot of I think that I don't know if it's necessarily a problem in games, but I always find myself gravitating towards games that remove features for the sake of a better experience overall than adding on more features to distract from poor decisions.
I think a
And
lot of it was came from my experience working on Guild Wars 2. Like when I was like back in what was that like 2012 or 2013. This was like when League of Legends and Dota were first becoming popular. And like the thing that people like me would play when we wanted to play a competitive game was we would play like the PvP component of an MMO, you know? And
yeah,
then like I remember as League and Dota were becoming popular, I would like talk to people about like MMO PvP and the general sentiment became like, well, how can you possibly compete with a game that's only being, like 5v5 on one map when you're a game that's doing all these other things? Like there's so much in Rift Wizard that just like wouldn't make sense if the game were even a little bit different. And so like by keeping like for example the teleport spell, right? A directed teleport with a set number of charges. In most games that would either be overpowered or totally irrelevant. But in Rift Wizard it's like, yeah, I don't know. And like I always had this I remember working on Guild Wars 2, I always had this sentiment like, man, if only this game was simpler, like if only there was less in this game, then we could do more if there was less here. Like if only I mean, so with Rift Wizard, I was like, if this game has if it is like only a game where you can be a wizard and you are just running through this series of combats and there's like no scripted events and every level is about killing the layers and all the monsters and then choosing another level, then like, then I can make 100 spells if that's the game. So I was like always very I always had the sense that I wanted to be really careful adding mechanics to the game, and I think that did work out. I think that's just like something that people are learning about game design. I think in like 2005 to 2015, people were imagining that the perfect game would be like an MMO that had everything. Whereas I think now, after we've seen like Dota and Minecraft, which are like two super successful games that have almost nothing in them, now the way people think about games is like make the game as limited as possible, and then you can do a lot in it.
I think that might be the quote of the conversation right there. Just that if we had so much less, we could do so much more. But
Yeah,
the game is out. It's done and dusted. I guess kind of the wrap up here is what's the future plans for Rift Wizard, and what's next?
yeah. What a question. I mean, I'm definitely going to do a couple more patches. There's like the most fun part of working on Rift Wizard is making spells and passive abilities, and I kind of had to like slow down on that a bit in early access because I was adding all these big systems to the game. But I want to spend a little bit more time just like adding content. Like I'm going to do the next big thing is going to be the December patch, which is going to have metal magic. There's if you want to preview that, you can check out the beta branch right now. There's some cool stuff. You can mercurize things and turn them into quicksilver geists or mercurial geist. I forget what the name is right now. You can like shoot a holy spear at people and damage arcane and dark units along the way, which inspired a long conversation about what is a dark unit versus an undead unit versus a demon unit. But yeah, I think what's next for Rift Wizard is just more content, like more spells, shrines, upgrades, maybe a couple more monsters. I don't want to add I don't want to add more systems because I feel like the systems that are there right now work pretty well. There's like a good equilibrium between them. So I think the foreseeable future of Rift Wizard is just more content. Then I think me personally, eventually I'll want to work on probably another game, maybe something in a slightly different genre than Rift Wizard. And then I think someday I'll probably make Rift Wizard 2. And Rift Wizard 2 will probably be an opportunity to revisit like basic stuff about Rift Wizard, like can you upgrade skills in the way that you can upgrade spells, or like maybe you shouldn't even be able to upgrade spells, or like you know maybe character classes, something like that. I think the opportunity to do like really big systems changes is probably a sequel.
That is exciting to hear. I'll be honest. I don't often expect to hear people stating that they're going to make a sequel to a roguelike because so many roguelikes are, how do I explain this? Like forever games to a degree where, yeah, they're like the original games as a service. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think if I want to keep working on Rift Wizard, I eventually have to make a sequel because that's like eventually people like new there will not be enough new customers left to
yeah,
support development. So just
no,
like
for sure.
the way you kind of it's almost like doing a Kickstarter or a Patreon,
Yeah.
where you're just like, let's keep going with this game idea. It's really cool, and like let's see what the next iteration of it is. And if you think that the changes that I'm talking about are enough, then like please, please give me another $15. Kind of the way that I think about that.
Well, the way I see it is $15 is a small price to ask for a game with probably thousands of hours of content currently already for the current game.
Yeah, I like to
So,
think so.
but
I think if I'm doing my job, it's a very good value. Yeah.
but seriously, thank you very much for taking this hour out of your day to come chat with me and record some
Has it been
stuff.
an hour already? Wow. Yeah, it has been.
Getting close, yeah. Is there
Yeah,
is
yeah.
there anything you want to shout out or say before we wrap this up?
Oh, I don't know, man. Thanks to everyone who bought Rift Wizard. I can't believe that there are other people so excited about this weird game that I wanted to make, and it's just awesome.
Well, thanks for your time and thanks for chatting with me. We can
Yeah, yeah. Great talking to you, man.